I'm very, very pleased to welcome Oleksandra Derevianko is a theatre maker from Ukraine who moved to the UK in 2022 because of the war and had multiple successful shows in Ukraine from 2020 to 2022. 6 months before the war, Olex opened the Fourth Apartment Theatre with friends in Kiev. They ran a few shows based on plays by modern Ukrainian playwrights, but the war changed the further plans and forced the team members to close the theatre. Olex is now based in Manchester and is taking her first creative steps in the UK. Olex was one of the participants of the Ukrainian Laboratory of Drama 2020, and since then has written 7 plays, 6 of which were staged. The last plays, Ukraine Land, The Fourth Wall and The Insomnia of Humpty Dumpty, were presented at international festivals in Poland, in Przemyśl, and the UK in Liverpool and Manchester in 2023. Also, the documentary book Screenshot Ukraine is being prepared for publishing in early 2024. Olex was on stage from childhood and later developed her acting skills in the studios Splash and Valis in Ukraine. She acted in numerous experimental shows in Ukraine, Prague and the UK. In Ukraine, Olex was an active theatre maker with a wide range of projects, including ecological experimental performances, Christmas pantomimes, monodramas and immersive shows. After closing the Fourth Apartment Theatre and moving to the UK, Olex managed to run the first show, The Insomnia of Humpty Dumpty, at home in Manchester during the Horizons Festival. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you.
And my next guest is Jo Evans. Jo is a lecturer in animation with a focus on 2D animation techniques and visual storytelling, teaching across all levels of the animation course at the School of Digital Arts here at SODA. As an animator and illustrator, Jo has experience fostering strong creative collaborative relationships with artists, writers, filmmakers and musicians, working on diverse projects, including music videos, short films, documentaries and animation for live performance, providing immersive moving image experiences, combining digital and mechanical projection techniques. Jo is interested in experimental approaches to animation, utilising Photoshop, After Effects and Toon Boom Harmony to combine drawings, photos and videos and textures with digital rigged cutout characters, rotoscoping and motion graphics. So Jo, again, thank you so much for joining us, and it's great to have you on the panel.
Pleasure.
So I have questions for both of the guests. We'll take about an hour, and then at the end there's an opportunity if anybody here also wants to ask questions. Olex, I'm going to come to you first. You are a writer, actor and director. You work in theatre. Can you talk about your background, your interests and the kind of work that you make?
Yeah, so my background is... Basically I don't have a theoretical degree, but I was a theatre all my life since my 8 years old. For some reason I decided to learn Japanese language, but I've never worked with that. And basically I was in theatre all my life. First of all, it was just like studio for children. Then it was something in the school. Then it was like a couple of studio for amateurs. And just before the war, like about a year, we had this crazy idea with my friends to have a theatre in Kiev. But Kiev is a very competitive place for theatres. Amateur studios, like everything is about that, and people want to act, people want to attend, but like it's really complicated to open something new and attract new audience. So we were working in museum of an actress, Maria Zenkowiecka, and we had like very dusty old empty space with an exhibition from 1989, so like it was basically abandoned space inside of the museum, and it was in the middle of Kiev and no one used it. And we just decided to go to city council and ask to let us do something with that, because it was like government space. We couldn't use it just because of working there. And they were struggling to explain that, because they didn't want us to do something new, like because it's like too much noise, and maybe we will come in a month and we'll ask, I don't know, for money or something. So they didn't want us to do that at all. But we insisted at least to try. And I think it was August, like late August 2021, when we opened it. So like basically 7 months before the war, and we've done a few projects, like different ones basically, because we were experimenting with the audience, with the marketing, with everything. But yeah, unfortunately, in February, when everything was started, like it was impossible to continue doing that, because we had like no funding or something. It was just like our own initiative, our own free time, like no salaries, like nothing. We were just like working full time and doing it in our free time. And during all of this time, like I was writing plays and like trying myself as a playwright, and like I quite like that. But for me, just being a playwright is a kind of a lonely space to be in. And like I really love theatre rehearsal process. I mean, like I think theatre is like one of the like parallel realities inside of our life, which we can like use to know, like to get know ourselves like a bit more. And I was trying a few times to leave and to stop doing that, but I just can't. Like for me, it's something I must have in my life. And I've never considered myself probably as a pro, and I haven't tried to direct my own work in Ukraine. But when I moved here, kind of something changed, like, and I just stopped questioning myself if I can do it or not. And I had this opportunity to do something within this festival Horizon, which was in June. Basically, it's every year in June. It's a home, so it's a refugees week and 2 or 3 days festival with artists from different countries. And I had like 15-minute spot maybe there in 2023. So I created like this small draft of a script, I would say, the Insomnia of Humpty, Dumpty, and we've done just with one actress. Again, it was just like a small piece, like just an experiment, but I had a lot of really good feedback. And I basically found a team. We applied for grant, surprisingly got it this year, and finally done like a proper show. And sharing was basically a few days ago on Saturday. It was just work in progress sharing, so we are in the middle of this journey, and hopefully it will be as successful as it was before, because it's an unusual experience to write in English, to perform in English, to direct in English. Sometimes it's tough, but like it's really interesting to see how audience understands and get involved here, which is a bit of different world from the Ukraine, especially now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Joe, my next question to you, can you do something similar? So can you introduce yourself, your work, and also your role here at Soda?
Sure, yeah. So I've always been interested in animation, as a child, and kind of follows through into my school and stuff. The idea of like creating, drawing characters, bringing things to life, it's really appealing. We did these work placements at school. I did a work placement at King Rollo Films in Devon, where they made Spot the Dog at the time. So I was really interested in that sort of process and that idea of kind of bringing drawings to life. So I did animation at university, and that was very experimental. So on one hand, I had this experience of working in studios, kind of kids' cartoon stuff, but the degree kind of encouraged us to be very kind of experimental, artistic. I kind of grew that side of my sort of skills and ideas, and sort of like that tension of kind of moving into very creative, experimental processes of animation. So when I came out of university, I was kind of stuck between wanting to kind of like try out the studio system and try that, had a go at that, but didn't find it was appropriate for me. So I kind of moved into working with illustration more in that kind of collaborative one-to-one sort of dynamic that you get in illustration. But then again, my animation kind of came out through that, and I started to collaborate on animation projects in that kind of way that I learned from working as an illustrator. So music videos and kind of motion graphic stuff, advertising, short films, bits of animation for documentary and documentary feature films. So this idea of being like a collaborative animator rather than an animator within a studio was really appealing to me, and that's kind of what I formed my career around. Alongside that, I started teaching as well. So that's brought me here to Soda, and it's kind of really exciting sort of breeding ground for new ideas and new ways of using the technology and keeping that experimental side alongside that kind of commercial sort of way of viewing things as well. So yeah, it's really exciting. I'm trying to maintain a sort of like projects with that sort of collaborative head on as well alongside the teaching practice. So yeah.
Yeah, a place where disciplines can overlap.
Yes, I think that's really good, and something that Soda's really tried to encourage as well. We have things like the collabs module where it's interdisciplinary when different students from different disciplines come together to create projects, which has interesting results.
Fantastic, thank you. So Olex, I'm going to come back to you and talk a bit more about the specifics of your work. So I was lucky enough to see your most recent production on Saturday, the Insomnia of Humpty, Dumpty. Can you give an overview of the work, the themes behind it, and the content within the play?
Yes. So basically, it's strangely documentary piece, which probably doesn't look like that from the first sign. So it's me having an insomnia one night because of everything that's going on in my life, and my memory in different shapes is coming to me, and then my alter ego, who is present as Mad Hatter, is coming to me, and we're having like a long conversation which is becoming more and more intense and probably finishing like in some sort of like almost fight with myself. And basically, I don't think I was like thinking a lot when I was writing this piece, what is it about? But then when I finished that, I just understood that basically I was trying to heal my trauma. And basically the whole piece is about this acceptance of your trauma and how you're dealing with that, and how it's basically the part of your past, how it impacts your present, and that it's still with you in the future, but everything depends on how you're talking to that, or you're blocking these memories, or you're talking to them. And yeah, it just very tough production for me, but at the same time it was very unusual to work with my own story, because before the war, like I've never even considered to write something about me, because like, oh, I've got so many ideas, like I will be as a Tolkien or I don't know, John Rowling, like I don't want to write about myself. But after the beginning of the war, my first play was basically just a collection of documentary monologues from like other people, and after like I came up surprised with this play, and acting there was quite a vulnerable and interesting experience for me. But it's still this topic's probably no Ukrainian can avoid as a war, what we had before, what do we have now, how our future looks like, who are we within the situation, and especially for Ukrainians who left Ukraine, it's a question about like immigration. Who are you here? How are you adapting here? What to do with the feeling of guilt that you escaped and you're in a safe place, when like my family, for example, is still in Ukraine, and this huge difference between like our worlds now. So yeah, basically I was trying to process it and think I'm still doing that.
Thank you. It's a really powerful piece of work, and hearing you talking about it is powerful as well. So I'm going to come back to the film that we've just seen, which is Viktor Robot. It's from 2020. The production ended in 2020. So, Joe, I'm coming to you. So from an animation perspective, can you give an overview of the work involved in a project of this length? So, for example, how do characters emerge from a story or an idea? At what point does the sound and music happen, and what kinds of processes are involved?
Yeah, so I was saying to you earlier that I reached out to the director earlier and was able to get a response. So I have a little bit of an idea of what the kind of intentions were and where this project was coming from. So I think this idea of creating a story, there's something very picture book about this film. I think it comes through in the visuals and the design of it. This idea of like presenting to a younger audience and having like a clear idea of a moral message that comes through. And I think we got a question about themes later on, but I think that's the kind of driving force behind a film like this, and the kind of characters and the sort of wider characters and the world building comes out of that idea of wanting to tell a story about something like friendship and responsibility and telling the truth and not manipulating people. So I think that comes through in the storytelling and the design of the project. It kind of echoes through everything else. In terms of the practicalities of the project, I was interested to hear there were some concept ideas, like the idea of originally wanted to animate the robots in 3D animation, have the human characters in 2D and have that really distinct visual difference between those. But they found that the 3D was just too difficult to kind of create and too time consuming. So they decided to kind of find a compromise in using 2D rigged animation in Toon Boom Harmony, which is a really a useful way of cutting out a lot of the workload, because you only have to draw the character several times and then pose it and manipulate it like a puppet, which is, it saves you having to draw a character over and over and over again, which is the traditional method in 2D animation. So it was interesting to hear about that. And yeah, in terms of the process, there's an extensive pre-production process. So the story is a script is written just like with a live action feature film. And the storyboards are produced, and the storyboarding process, often animation is a bit like the writing process. So the storyboarding process is really crucial in visualizing the film. So they will storyboard every shot of the film and rework that and get that down how they want it before they start production process, because they want to save all of the sort of like the time and cost in that moment. So the film is kind of almost done in storyboard before they start producing the animation. In terms of sound, mostly with Western animation, they will record the voice performances first, so that the animation performances can be built around that. In Japanese animation, that's often different. So, but in Western animation, yes, the actors come in, they do their characters, and then the animators will listen, will think about what the performances are, and will build a character around that vocal performance. And then the music often will come in a bit later. Sometimes you might get animation synced to music. The feature film, often it's scored later. So yeah, it's different stages of production. Pre-production is really, really important in animation, especially live action, especially feature film.
Thank you. That's a real insight into the process and into the industry as a whole as well, actually. Thank you. Okay, so back to Olex. One of the themes of your performance was how little people know about Ukraine as a country. So from this point of view, how important do you think it is for people to create and view Ukrainian artwork in all its forms? What can this kind of work bring to people's understanding of Ukraine and also its national identity?
Yes, I think I was talking about that on Saturday too, that what I'm facing here sometimes, we don't even have some sort of stereotype about Ukrainian people. I mean, about Eastern Europe, yes. About like post-Soviet Union space and like what was going on there, yes, there is some sort of stereotype. About Russia, yes. But about Ukraine, like we didn't properly exist before the war was evolved. And I can't say that like it's not our fault too, because like we haven't done enough during like our independent history. But I do think that projects about Ukraine, even if they're done not by Ukrainians here, must be shown, especially now, because I feel that like 2022, after the beginning of the war, it was a lot of about what's going on, like about current situation, and then everything disappeared, which is quite naturally probably because people are getting tired, like we're not in use as much as we were before, which is upsetting, of course. And I'm kind of trying not to think about that all the time, that like, oh, people don't know about us. But like as someone who is writing and creating, I feel that like I just must do something just to show who we are and that we're different and why this war is going on now. Just it's not because we are equal, just because we're different and we don't want to get back to the 20th century history. We do want our own history and want to keep our culture, because a lot of bits were like just probably erased. A lot of artists disappeared like from the story. Sometimes some artists are well known as the Russian or Soviet, which is, to be honest, for the world is Russian still, but they're Ukrainians, and they were like a patriotic Ukrainians, and they were like trying to create some bits about that, but we just don't know about that, and the world doesn't know about that. And here, like a few times, I've heard that people doesn't even know that like Chernobyl is in Ukraine, and like basically Ukraine and Belarus like suffered a lot because of that. And it's almost funny because we had this HBO TV a few years ago, and a lot of people watched that, but they didn't get where Chernobyl is. And like it's of course like it's a pity because like I grew up not too far away from Chernobyl zone, and like we all have like the documents that like we have that, so like we can have like some certain problems with our health. And creating that piece, like I'm kind of consciously like pushing myself to give people at least a little bit of like documentary stuff, like to explain what happened before, to tell about Orange Revolution, because like people don't know about that at all, what happened like in 2004. A little bit some people who like watch Netflix Winter on Fire, they know about Revolution of Dignity, and that basically the war started then in 2014, and full-scale war we have now. And yeah, I just hope, of course, like I can't just go on a stage and tell people, okay, history of Ukraine, so we have an independence, blah blah blah, but at least like I can push them to get back home and try to learn a little bit more, because I think it's just an important bit, and I don't see here a lot of projects about Ukraine. Sometimes something, but again, when I moved in 2022, it was sometimes at least like I could see that, but now nothing at all.
And it makes everything important, so everything that people are producing and everything that people watch and all of the things behind that as well. I think it's vital for people to produce work and for people to view it as well.
Yeah.
So Jo, coming back to something that you touched on in one of your previous answers, which is about the themes in the work that we've just watched. So there are adult and childhood themes in the work. So for example, grief, loss, friendship, which you mentioned, work. So how important do you think it is for animation and for children's films in particular to work across different levels like this?
Yeah, I think it is really important. I think it's really important for the projects. It helps shape the project, like I was suggesting. That idea of like a theme or an idea that can ground the project and give the characters purpose and focus and help create the world. But I think this idea of storytelling as messaging and as kind of like giving us a focus and a talking point and something to think about is really important in storytelling. I think it's always been there. The kind of fables, morals, this idea of storytelling as a powerful sort of grounding for our souls in the world, I think is, you know, a really important thing in animation, in literature, and in film, and all of these things. So yeah, I think the idea of themes coming through, and I was kind of unpicking for it not to be kind of really didactic and kind of preachy, but for it to kind of come through in our understanding of relating to the characters. And so when we kind of in the middle of the film there, when she realizes that she's been lying and she's been kind of found out, I think that is a moment that lots of children will recognize from their lives already, and will really relate to that. And I think that's really powerful, and that's more powerful being told you have to be right all the time, and a kid is being good all the time through the film, to see a child fail and get it wrong and regret, and to have that come through and to feel the strength of the friendship after that, I think it's really important. And you know, animation can do things with those sorts of themes visually that maybe other forms can't. So the idea of having a friend carried around in the hood of another friend, and that they kind of depend on each other in this way, is more easily represented through the size and the scale of those characters, and the way that we kind of visualize things through the eyes of the robots, and we see the little representations of the friendship handshake and things like that coming through in a very direct way, but also in a way that is, you know, kind of feels like it's suitable for animation. Whereas if that happened in live action, that wouldn't maybe feel as appropriate. So yeah, I think animation can work visually in those ways, sometimes really kind of on the nose, but other times more subtly, in the way that she might cradle him and pick him up and kind of rely on him and move him around, but also manipulate him in her hand and tell him to go and do things. I think it's really powerful.
Thank you. That symbiotic relationship, I hadn't picked up on the metaphor there of her carrying him around in the hood. But it's really powerful, and it's applicable on many different levels. So it's possible to sort of see that on many different levels. So Olex, coming back to you, and on the subject of language, on Saturday after your performance, you spoke in a Q&A about language, and you spoke about writing in Russian, Ukrainian and English. Can you talk about this in your work, and how and why you think it's important for artists to make work in Ukrainian?
So I just think that now, especially now, it's a very painful moment, like about probably for most of people, but I can't probably talk about everyone. But I do know that, for example, if I'm going to my social media now and people are tired and exhausted and angry, and like it's understandable. But if before we didn't have much problem with that, like I mean, in Ukraine, like we can speak both languages, and like it basically quite often depends on what language your family is speaking. But like for example, speaking Russian, so it was first language of mine. And then like I went to school when I was 6, and I started studying Ukrainian. But still, for me, it's kind of an unpleasant point, because I was writing in Russian till my maybe like 19, 20, and then I remember that point when I was thinking like why I'm living in Ukraine, but like writing in another language, and like it was fine for everyone, because like it was like two language surrounding, and it was kind of fine. But for me and for my identity, it was critical. And I started firstly writing in Ukrainian, which wasn't very easy for me, because it's still one group of languages, but it's quite different languages. And then I remember like in 2020, when I started writing plays, I started just talking only in Ukrainian, even to my parents, who are still speaking to me in Russian. But still, before the war, it wasn't a problem for most of us. And after, when now we understand that like basically it's a language of an enemy, even I'm like struggling sometimes when I see like news in this language, or I don't want to read in it anymore. And in social media, of course, people are just attacking each other because of the language. And it's a hard question, because I was always thinking that like it's not that important if we still can understand each other, and if idea sometimes like it's just an idea of your identity. It doesn't matter if it's in Ukrainian or Russian, but now it is becoming more and more important. And I'm, for example, understand that all of my poetry were written like in Russian, and I can't properly translate it. Like I can, but like it still sounds like not like I want it to sound. And still I feel that this first language like just implemented inside of me, like I just can't get rid of it. It's still, for me, more skilled language than Ukrainian and, of course, than English. And I do think that now we must create work in Ukrainian and explain that it's different languages, because not a lot of people know that it's quite a huge difference, that it's another language, of course. But it's an interesting point again, because in Ukraine, like, it's understandable that you're creating it in Ukrainian. For example, here abroad, if we're talking about like cinema, I think it's easier to create something in Ukrainian and have like subs in English, and it's still like you still can adjust it. It's fine. But about theater, I'm not sure like how it might work, because I've been to like some productions which I don't know in Italian, and you have the subtitles. For me, it doesn't work in the same way, and I do think that we need to explain more and explain like if we're here in English. And am I losing this point? Probably yes, a little bit, because I'm still trying like to write sometimes in Ukrainian, but like now basically plays and everything I'm planning to do, I'm doing in English. And yeah, in general, I do think it's important now just to talk about that and try to speak to our children in Ukrainian too, so they will have this language as their first one, as my niece now, for example. Because like my brother, quite consciously, they became talking only in Ukrainian before their first daughter were born. And now Vika is speaking only in Ukrainian. My parents are talking to her in Russian. And of course, like it's a problematic point, but they are starting talking in Ukrainian too, to her at least, because like childish language is like a bit easier. So like there is some sort of progress, but like it's quite a strange situation. And every time I'm thinking about that, oh my God, like I'm speaking to them in Ukrainian, they're responding to me in Russian. Like it's something that just doesn't feel right, but like it's our world.
Thank you. So Joe, coming back to you, my next question is about something in particular in Viktor Robot. Robots are popular in animation. So for example, WALL-E, but themes that are associated with this. So for example, themes of man and machine, technology, humans, emotion. So why and what do you think is successful about this as a way of building characters?
Yeah, robots have been sort of synonymous with animation and storytelling for a long time. So, you know, I was going to mention that there's an archive called animatsiya.net. It's like a Soviet and Eastern European animation archive. And I went through that when I realised I was going to be on this panel. And there's about 100 sort of Kiev studio produced films on that, animation films. And one of those was like called something like This Robot Will Help Us. I think it was like a puppet film from 1975. So it's really interesting to see, because I was looking for like sort of a kind of history of robots in Ukrainian animation to see what was there. And there was this one film that was there about a robot that kind of helps these kids tidy up litter and gets it a bit wrong and makes a mess, which is really interesting to see. But yeah, I grew up in the 80s and we had like Transformers and as a cartoon, robots in disguise everywhere. And, you know, robots were everywhere in cinema as well. You know, things like batteries not included and short circuit and stuff like that. So, you know, robots were everywhere then. This idea in animation of bringing inanimate objects to life by moving them, by giving them life through movement. I think it's a really potent sort of tool in animation. It's something that kind of naturally comes to animators, this idea of kind of in a Frank Myrisk way of like taking an object, like a shoe or something, and giving it life through movement. I think it's a really powerful thing. So I think animation lends itself to the idea of something that isn't human, and bringing lots of humanity, lots of anthropomorphism and kind of personality and soul to it. I think it's a really powerful thing to do in animation. So that's why animators kind of have this sort of lean towards to robots and other things that might not be alive in our lives, but want to bring life to them. So I think it's a kind of powerful sort of instinct with animators. But wider than that, in this film as well, there's kind of like dependence on technology and this idea of like an artificial sun, kind of, and this reliance on technology within that world, which is really interesting. And interesting in a film in which a human character, positions themselves as being the saviour and the kind of the sort of ruler of that sort of situation, when it feels like all the humans are very dependent on the technology around them. And there's this tension in literature and in our own lives, of feeling dependent on technology. And when it fails us, we kind of panic and feel like we're putting too much into technology. And I think it's interesting being at Soda, where things like AI are coming up a lot as a subject. This idea of what do we do with this? Do we kind of hide away from it, or do we use it as a tool and engage and collaborate with it and see where that takes us? I think it's a really interesting stage for us to be at. And that, these questions, they feel like quite new questions, but they've been there like through decades and decades of our relationship with technology. So,
yeah, thank you. Very insightful, very true. Okay, so Olex, my next question. The Insomnia of Humpty Dumpty, your work, is layered with references to literature, music, and other forms of art. Film is very much like this too. For example, in Viktor Robot, there is the use of song and storytelling. Can you talk about inspiration in relation to your work? What inspires you, and how important do you think it is for artists and creatives to take inspiration from both within and outside their direct field? So how do you use inspiration, and why is it important?
I think like different artists and different people understand inspiration like differently, because for some of artists it's just like some sort of like spark or an energy you're feeling, and then like you are ready to create, and like you are like very much into that. And for some people, inspiration is basically quite conscious choices of what are the examples for you and why. And I do think I'm kind of combining these two understandings for me. And I do know that like the Insomnia of Humpty Dumpty is basically full of references to British culture, because like my life was pretty much about British culture, because my mother, she loves British literature and history and everything about that. And my father is like music, everything about music, Pink Floyd, Beatles, Genesis, just everything. So like I've been told like since my 8 years old, like this is good music, this is high quality music. I didn't have an opportunity to listen to that in 70s, but you do. Basically, of course, like we had a lot of like Spanish, French literature. But I do think like basically the impact of the UK and like what does it mean to know English because it's international language, and like all of this like basically is a quite right way to the British culture. But it was for me like that, just because like you have something in school, and again like you learn a lot of literature, like significant people like from 19th, 20th century, and at the same time I have some sort of this at home. And I do think most of my inspirations were like digested unconsciously when I was like a teenager, especially when I was a teenager. But like later when I was just trying to analyze what do I love, I think I took a lot of inspiration from movies too, and usually it's sort of like Western Europe style, and like sometimes when I'm creating play, which is obviously not, which is theatre, it's not a cinema, but still I understand that kind of you can combine styles, and now especially in 21st century it's like a good thing to do, because like people are getting less and less surprised with new stuff. It's quite tough to create something new, and now I do things that reference by itself, not just as a point of inspiration, but like just a reference in your work, works very, very good sometimes, because people don't really want to go for the new stuff and be surprised or depressed or stressed or something. But if they have this like nostalgia point sometimes, they do know, okay, it's not as far away from me as I thought. And I do think that like with Insomnia of Humpty Dumpty, even with the name, I've done this sort of conscious manipulation, because like I knew I will be talking about Ukraine, about stuff people just don't know here. But like if I will use my connection to the UK to explain it, like it will be already like more relative. And I don't think like you need to do it all the time, to be honest. I mean, I do appreciate fresh works without any references. But yeah, for me, just because like it was my story, I just put it like and explained like why Pink Floyd was so important for me, like, and why I was protesting in my teenage age against the whole world. And like, what was the second part of the question?
Because the second part of the question is, why is it important? So how do you use inspiration, and why is it important? Which you have answered to some degree.
Yes, yeah. I still think like it's just important not to lose this when you're like growing up, and for example, if you're creating new stuff, and just like find new things to be inspired of, like not just to carry the same pack, and be inspired by new things, just to understand the modern world, probably.
Yes, the modern world versus nostalgia, and what you can do by linking those two things together.
Yeah.
And there's shortcuts for speaking to people as well. Okay, Joe, so back to you. My next question is about the film Viktor Robot. So what parts of the film appeal to you as an expert in the field, and how and where is the film most successful?
Yeah, I think it's most successful in its world building. I think that's really impressive, and the idea of like creating this world in which it's an artificial universe, and robots are so key and full of so much personality, and that sort of the depth and detail in that world is really interesting for quite a simple film, and the detail of the backgrounds and things like that are really, really interesting. Sense of scale as well. I think I mentioned this when talking about the relationship between the two central characters, but it comes across in kind of moments of like daunting moments when we're looking up at things and we're seeing beyond what's in the kind of centre of the screen out into the fringes of buildings upon buildings. And I think that's really impressive as well. There's lots of really nice animation moments, and I love it in animation when they set up a kind of a style and then they break out of that style and show you something else. So when we see Viktor's point of view of him fixing things, and it goes into kind of like electric, kind of 2D sort of sparky kind of viewpoint. I love things like that, and it's really exciting. And similar to that, the flashback that the granddad had towards the end there, where it's kind of staged really nicely but very still. There's kind of like a blurring of characters around him. It feels like a kind of montage sequence. That's really effective, and I really enjoy things like that when we kind of break out of the rhythm and the style that's established into something else, and it kind of keeps things kind of going and moving along. More to me than the songs. I think the songs are really energizing and fun, but for me, I'm not a massive musical fan, and when it kind of breaks out into song, I think some kids will find that really appealing, and I appreciate that. But for me, it's those moments when we kind of break out of one animation style into another, and it kind of feels like something else is happening. I find that really exciting.
Oh, thank you. That brings a lot to my understanding and perspective of the film as well, the way that you spoke about it. So Olex, I'm going to make this my final question and then see if other people have questions. So your work deals directly with themes of war. For other artists, history, politics and social concerns appear in other forms. what role does creative practice have in times of war?
I think, again, for me, back in times, maybe like 10 years ago, like politics and art were some sort of absolutely like separate worlds, and it doesn't really matter at world we're living in if we're creating great art. And at the same time, you can be a bad person, but be a great artist, and it's okay. But like now, I think a lot of things changed, and like I understand, for example, that even if I will be creating something which is not about Ukraine or about me, it still will be this war element there, just because like I'm already like carrying this story within me. And also I do think that art is a great way to heal, and great way to explain, not by dry language, but including different forms, including emotions, the current situation or the world we came from, and make other people who probably will never be there and will never experience the same stuff, but like feel something like that. Because, well, the life isn't fair. Like, we're in different positions. And I do know that, like, some people are avoiding these topics consciously, and it's their way to heal. But I still think that, for me, as for an artist abroad, it's important to highlight what's going on now, especially when I can see that, like, media are not talking about that enough. People think that like it's over because like they're asking me sometimes that it's still going on, which is quite painful, of course. And also, if I go into the future, for example, how we can understand the past. It's not only history, it's not only like who was the president or like who won that battle. It's also an art which is reflecting the time we're living in. I do think like it's important to build this wall from like different bricks, including this creative element, which might be theater, cinema, music, like just everything, because this situation like never been like that before, will never be like that after in the future. So like it's some sort of a way to catch the moment and like to offer next generations. I want to say like, and don't repeat the same mistakes, but I don't believe that humanity can be like that, because like we're just honestly just the same cycle. But at least like we can just fix this experience and give it to our children. And also just from my selfish point of view, again, like it's just a way of healing, which is quite brutal, for example, sometimes, because you're basically showing all of your brain, all of your mind, all of your emotions to the whole world, or like to certain amount of people. But it's still just important for me to talk, not just being silent there, because like there is a thought that if you escaped, you're kind of out of the situation, you're already fine. But it's not like that. Just because who you are, it's not only about where are you living. It's about a lot of things.
And well, that dialogue as testimony will be vital for future generations. And the lack of silence is important as well, especially in Ukrainian history.
Yeah, I do think that I think like Ukrainians, we're like very creative nation, talented nation. Unfortunately, especially because of the history of 20th century, a lot of our artists, especially like we had a very dark period of history, and we had 1933, which was a year when a lot of our genius artists were just killed. and a lot of pieces of work were just destroyed. And only now, I think, only like last 10 years, like by government and like human efforts, like we're trying to restore and like explain what happened there, to find some pieces. But like we know that like a lot of stuff just disappeared. And again, like we had this horrible point in history about like famine, which called Holodomor, and we do know that like a lot of like villages, a lot of places just disappeared, and we can't restore, for example, their dialect. We have no idea like what like patterns of like clothes they have, because for example our like national clothes like vyshyvankas, like it's like a coat of meanings. So basically every region had their own pattern, like, and you can explain it in different ways. We can't even know what was there, like it just erased. It's like these dark spots of like silence. We can't get it back, so that's why it's important to keep talking. And I do know that like especially playwrights in Ukraine like do understand it very well, and like really trying to create as much as possible and tell as much as possible for now, like for other countries, future generations. It's like such a desperate, intense, like let's don't be like we were like in 20th century. Like let's keep our history and what we going through now.
Thank you. I agree. It's vital. It's urgent. Okay, so I'm going to open up to questions if there are any. We've got about 10 minutes left. So does anybody have any questions? Esther, please.
So I was curious if there was a particular character that either of you relates to in the film, and Olex, what you said about it not really being a Ukrainian stereotype. Would you say there was any character in the film being reflective in certain thing that you think of as the Ukrainian stereotype?
I do think like in a cartoon, like it was really funny for me. It's like some moments of language, because it was like quite alive. And to be honest, I think like we don't have like a long story of Ukrainian production, so I probably like heard like language in cartoons which were created in Ukrainian, like not very often, like usually just like a translation. But here it was very alive language with like very like our typical way of thinking, and it was very funny sometimes, especially when Vika was talking to robots sometimes, and they were responding because they were like robots who were supposed to be like unhuman, like, and not alive, but like they were responding like, I don't know, like some Ukrainians are talking like every day in the kitchen probably, and it was really funny. And like about well, I don't know, like I think in terms of well, maybe a little bit to Markian, I think Markian Bartolomeyevich rather than to Vika, because Vika well, Vika is basically very similar to my memory, I think, in a lot of ways, in my play The Insomnia of Humpty Dumpty. And yeah, the grandfather is more mature and wise choice, so probably in terms of just the character and the way that like he's created this world and like he operates in that, like, yeah, I think like it can be explained in a lot of different ways. It's not only like mechanic and machines, like it's just a creation of something, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know about personality-wise, but in terms of the grandfather, I think I'm going to aim for that facial hair. That was very impressive. So maybe that. And a moral kind of tale that with kind of facing some of those dilemmas, I think it kind of tries to put us in that place. So I think we do kind of connect with that central character's sort of feeling of, oh no, I've done the wrong thing by manipulating someone or making a mistake like this. So I think when she blushes, when she feels she's really on the spot, I think that really draws us in. So I think I did feel like her in that moment, so embarrassed for her maybe. So that's really relatable.
It's a very significant point of the film as well. Thank you.
I'm also Ukrainian, so I can relate to everything we say about war and everything. So I'm just country recently, so I just wonder if you can share some tips how you do with your films.
It's kind of very tough question because I think yes, like the writing is like basically helping me, but without that, like the thing is that like then I moved. When I moved, I like consciously didn't connect myself with the Ukrainian community here because I was aware I want to adapt more quickly, and like if I will be surrounded like by British people, it will be just more effective, like in terms of learning language, understand like how world works here, and like now I was just like really lucky because I'm working within like a great company and I like these people, but I'm only one probably. Not just Ukrainian, I think like only one person from Eastern Europe. I don't think that we have anyone else in Factor International. Well, maybe one more, but but like definitely not from Ukraine. And quite often, especially when I'm having bad news, like my like line manager, she's great, but she's ready, like I can have some like mentally hard days, but I don't really want to use it just because I kind of feel it's, you know, like you're in this world, you're having this job, like you need to carry on, and especially when some sort of bad news coming up in the morning, quite often I'm just like blocking thoughts about that during the day, and then like I'm just talking to my parents about that. And it's my way to reflect, and also like just listening to Ukrainian music for some reason, especially like new music which were created like after. Like sometimes like it feels like I'm just torturing myself, to be honest, because like it's it can be like very emotional stuff, but like in the same way I'm at least giving myself some time and opportunity to process the emotions, because suppressing the memories and thoughts and news all the time, like it just can't work properly. And also, how long are you here? Just 6 months. Yeah, I do think that probably first year is the most complicated one. Because like you're still like partly there, partly here. You sometimes don't understand what people are saying, or you can just guess. Or sometimes you like if especially like I couldn't find a job like for a long time. Like I was struggling with that. Like I was very desperate. Like was thinking that like maybe it's a mistake. I need to get back. And just a lot of other like cultural codes which are basically unspoken, which you recognize them, but like don't understand them like fully. They're not helping when it's tough. But I think after the first year, so it will be 2 years in a few days, how I moved here, you're like just getting used to that, just because I do think that like just our brain just can't be in this constant stress all the time, and like it's getting easier, and yeah, you're just finding your own ways to deal with that, which is like less painful. But yeah, sometimes, especially when we're having like some bad news on like government level, and they know that like I'm here, and people here just don't know about that because it's not highlighted in news anymore as it was before, because before people just knew about that, like it happened and like it was some sort of sympathy. Now I need to talk about that. I mean, like, you know, this happened, that's why I'm sad. And sometimes it's helping too, if you're just telling people that, yes, I'm not okay today because this happened. Of course, like, they can't feel the same, but at least something you can do.
Thank you for your question. So thank you to both of the panelists. Olex, it's great just to have your insights. Your work's fantastic. I'd recommend for other people to follow your production, and it's brought so much richness to the film that we've just watched, to hear you talk about the broader context of producing work and the context surrounding that as well. So thank you for talking so openly. Joe, your insights and your kind of expertise have brought layers to the film. So thank you again. Thank you for joining the panel. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope to see you here again soon.